Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 5 in our expert assessment series. We're happy to have you join us today. And while we wait for people to trickle into the live stream, please tell us where you're coming from and drop a hi and a hello in that chat box. Today, we've got a really awesome panel lined up, and we'll get to the discussion in just a second. But before we do, I want to go over the format. So we'll have the entire session, and then we'll also have a Q&A towards the end. So be sure to drop your questions and comments in the chat box along the way. And also, you can find all of the episodes of the Expert Assessment Series and some other useful content in IFMA's Coronavirus Resource Center. So with that, let me go ahead and hand it over to Peter Ockerstern, who's moderating today's session. Peter?
Thanks, Chris, and a warm welcome to this session, which is the fifth of the series of Future of Work post-COVID-19, the Experts Assessment. The general idea behind this series is really to focus on the research that IFMA has provided and bring you close to the experts to share their insights and conclusions. You can find a recording of all the previous sessions at IFMA's website or on YouTube, and there will also be a link to this in the show notes. My name is Peter Ankerstjerne. I'm the chairman of the IFMA Board of Directors, and in my day job, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Plan Software. And as Chris said, I will be your host for the session. Today's webinar will focus on presenting and discussing the findings and conclusions from the Expert Assessment Survey that took place over the summer last year, and the report was released in October. This was the first survey of its kind within the FM industry, and also the first survey taking a subject matter expert view in terms of understanding some of the consequences from the COVID-19 pandemic, which it seems that we still have to deal with a little while longer. The survey report is available on the IFMA website, where you can also download the free executive summary. All the slides from the webinar will be available to you who have signed up from this as well. But let me start by introducing a very experienced international panel. First up, we have Kate Lister. Kate is president of Global Workplace Analytics, a research-based consulting firm that helps employers develop and deploy telework and other workplace or workforce strategies that are good for the people, planet, and profit. Kate is a globally recognized expert on remote and telework who has testified before the US Congress. Kate is also an active member of the IFMA Workplace Evolutionaries Communities of Practice, and she is based in Carlsbad, California. Next up, we have Trine Thorn. Trine is Global Head of Group Workplace Management and Physical Security at Nordea, which is one of Europe's largest financial service companies and operates in 20 countries. Trine is an experienced professional within real estate and FM, but also with a strong background from customer and employee experiences and marketing. Trine also serves on the board of directors of the Danish Facility Management Network, and she is based in Copenhagen, Denmark. Then we have Nov Omana, and Nov is the founder of Collective HR Solution and is an expert on HR technology assessment and evaluation. He serves on the International Human Resource Information Management Board and is an advisor to the Oracle HR User Group Board, Clearview Management Advisory Board, and Epic HR's Advisory Board. He's also a presenter, moderator, and contributor for IHR, IM, and other HR associations, and he's often sought by media for opinions on the industry in general and for insights on technology and trends within HR. Nov is based also in California, but in San Mateo. Then we have Nigel Oseland, and Nigel is Director of Workplace Unlimited. He's an environmental psychologist, workplace strategist, change manager, researcher, author, and international speaker. Nigel works with his clients to redefine their work styles and create cost-effective and space-efficient workplaces that enhance concentration, collaboration, creativity, and business performance. Nigel is based in East Hertfordshire in the United Kingdom. And last but certainly not least, we have Jeffrey Saunders. Jeff is executive advisor and futurist. He's the CEO of Nordic Foresight, and is the IFMA Workplace Evolutionaries Denmark Hub Leader. Jeff has previously worked as Director and Head of Strategy and Innovation at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and before this he worked as a national security consultant to the government in the United States. Jeff is originally a US citizen and still a US citizen, originally from San Diego, also in California, so it seems we have a good group of Californians here, at least a majority of our panelists from California now, but Jeff is now based in Copenhagen, Denmark. All right, so over the next 60 minutes or so, we will shortly introduce the Delphi methodology that we used for the survey and the experts assessment. And then Jeff will spend about 15 minutes taking us through some of the key findings from the survey related to well-being and hybrid working. Then we'll have the remainder of the time, we'll have a panel discussion, which will focus on the key conclusions and also take questions from the audience. The full report covers 6 themes, but again, today we'll cover well-being and hybrid working. And please use the chat box on the right of your screen if you have questions, comments, or input today to the panel today. Today's topic, apart from the headline around well-being and hybrid working, we'll talk about the opportunities and challenges with remote work, and also the implications of workers on organizations and facility management about this whole thing about hybrid working and how it's impacting our daily lives now, but more so in the future. Just a few insights from the Delphi methodology that we have been working on. This was introduced in greater detail in our first webinar back from September last year. So I won't go into detail with this. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with this. but the purpose of the survey was really to understand how COVID-19 will shape our collective future through the crisis and into the post-crisis normal. What will the future of work look like after the pandemic, and how will the crisis impact the future of work, workforce, and workplace? The reason we chose the Delphi study approach was really to obtain a variety of diverse industry expert perspectives on some of the key questions and assumptions that we were developing and we were talking about in general within the FM industry at large. The Delphi service operates really via an online platform, and the whole dialogue between these geographically separated experts is really to identify some consensus views, but also some divergent opinions. The ones that are participating in the survey can go in and then change their answers and their input on the survey, and they can do that on a continuous basis, and that gives us an idea of what is the consensus view that is going forward, and that we can work with afterwards in the report. It does give us a curated view of industry-leading subject matter experts on some of the key challenges that they believe are facing the industry. The survey was established in collaboration with IFMA's 6 communities of practice. 650 industry-leading subject matter experts were invited to participate in the survey, and 250 of those actively worked on the survey. So we're very happy with that level of response, and also on the outcome of that. We received more than 2,500 comments that we could then work with in the report that is out. So with that introduction to both the panel and a little bit of background to the survey, I'll like to hand it over to Jeff Saunders, who will then take us through some of the highlights that was presented in the survey and that we could pull out from the experts' assessments related to the whole area around well-being and hybrid working. So over to you, Jeff.
All right, Peter, thank you so much for that fantastic introduction. Now, before we begin giving you some of the insights from the experts assessment Delphi survey, we'd like to ask you, what are your challenges that you're facing in supporting employees and remote workers and ensuring their well-being. Now, this is an open question that we would like you to please respond in the comment section. We want to create a discussion and garner some of these insights to make a more richer and nuanced discussion among our panelists. So please provide some insights about what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing when you're supporting your remote employees and trying to ensure their well-being. Now, as Peter said, we've been conducting this process, a series of now 5 webinars and the findings from the Delphi survey conducted over last summer. And we've begun on this journey, this remote shift to remote working. If you are in Europe, we started it exactly almost a year ago to the day today. I was in Austria trying to make my way, desperately back to Copenhagen before the lockdown hit, and I made it back the day before the lockdown came into being. And what we saw, depending upon the country, is that between 18 and to 42 or 45%, depending on the survey that you look at, of the labor market shifted automatically to remote work in March of last year. Now, that shift depended, specifically on the job that one had. There's some people, frontline workers and things like that, that had to continue working during the COVID-19 crisis, pandemic. There are others who just were simply unemployed or furloughed for the time that they were working. But it also depends upon the type of infrastructure that's available. The ILO has done a study as well, and they look globally, not for just high-income countries only, but globally about 18% of the workforce has access to the type of job that enables remote working and the infrastructure to actually enable them to do so. So we all need access to high-speed broadband connections to participate in this panel debate. Not everybody has the ability to do so. So right now we've rounding out a year's experience with about close to half of the workforce working remotely. Now, since December last year, we have actually entered into a post-vaccine era, and there's reasons to be cautiously optimistic. There is light at the end of the tunnel. First, because over 200 vaccines are currently in development. 6 have been authorized. Latest, the Johnson & Johnson one-shot and done vaccine. Another 21 are in large-scale human testings, and 74 in general are in clinical trials. Now, we have 2 small countries that are, already very well advanced in their vaccine rollout. That's Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The UK is actually the world's leader among larger countries in doing a vaccine rollout, followed by the United States. So things are going well and progressing, though there are some requirements. We need to get 70-90% of the population to be immunized in order to achieve herd immunity. And there's also that issue around all sorts of new types of variants of COVID, which could throw us back to square one. But we have some reason to be cautiously optimistic, and we have to start thinking about what does our post-COVID workplace strategy need to look like. So if we look into slide 12, so we have to ask this question, thinking about the post-COVID work environment, is what is the scale of remote work and telework post-COVID-19? Now, there's a little bit of nuance. Most often I'll use remote work and telework interchangeably. But there is a nuance if we want to be very specific about it. Remote is typically 100% time working from home, and telework or telecommuting is when you're the ability to come into the office a couple days a week. Now, when we surveyed our subject matter experts and we look at surveys elsewhere, the consensus view is that most knowledge workers will work 1 to 2 days a week from home post-COVID-19. 81% of our subject matter experts from the Delphi expect at least 26% of workers will work remotely most of the time. But this is important to note that this discussion about what's right for each company is something that has to be adjudicated by each organization in and of itself. We just had a couple weeks ago, David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, saying, hey, for them, remote work at scale is not the ideal for Goldman Sachs. It's an aberration, and they want to return to a return to the previous ways of working as quickly as possible. Of course, with some aspects of work remotely, but by and large, people back in the office. So the question we should be asking ourselves is what is right for your organization? Now, if we go to the next slide, what we're seeing is a number of hybrid work strategies are coming to the forefront. And when we had the survey and the discussions and the subject matter expert comments that we reviewed, people started making references to hybrid work environments and making references to a number of different types of spaces. So they started talking about home services for teleworkers and remote workers, working near home options and co-working environments and community hubs. A shift in the role of the office as some sort of collaborative headquarters or hubs, and the usage of event spaces to bring people together. And then, of course, a surge in the usage of new technology platforms that would integrate all the aspects together. Again, depending on the market, depending on the country, the availability of the infrastructure is one of the key questions for enabling that to occur. Next slide, please. So when we start talking about this and the shift to increase use of remote and teleworkers, up to a quarter or more of our workers working remotely, it has a fundamental question that arises for organizations, which is who pays and ensures their well-being when they're working from remotely. And when we asked this question to our subject matter experts, they expected that companies would pay for things like computers, audio devices like headphones and conference audio equipment, monitors, memberships maybe for co-working and flexible working arrangements. However, they were very split over who should pay for more of the home infrastructure elements, things as desks, chairs, and internet solutions. And this actually poses a number of challenges. There's a study done by Lenovo, the computer equipment manufacturer, and in their global study of workers, they noticed that 70% of workers were having to actually purchase equipment to be able to work remotely during the COVID lockdown. That was the first stage. Now we're talking into a stage where more people are going to be working remotely for a longer period of time. But the question is, who actually is paying for the equipment to be able to do jobs well? Many people are beginning to complain of new or worsening aches and pains while working remotely from COVID-19. So we're having some ergonomic issues that really raises the well-being question to the forefront. And then there's this question about savings. Now, Kate, I love having her on the panel because she is the expert on figuring out actually the cost savings and benefits and the like related to remote work. And she's calculated out that on average, companies in the United States can save on average $11,000 annually for each remote worker who works or telecommutes 2.5 days per week. And individual people could save around $3,000, and I believe it's 60 days a week, or 14 days a week, sorry, in commuting due to not spending time in traffic. So there's some big savings, but the question is that the right balance, or should we have a discussion about how organizations should invest that money in their workers moving forward? Next slide, please. But what we're seeing is based on this shift and based on the expectation that people are going to be working more often remotely, is that we're going to see some regulatory changes afoot. Now, in the subject matter experts, 62% of them expected that there will be more regulations mandating that organizations provide equipment, training on ergonomic and working conditions for remote workers. But this was one of these questions that really divided the panel based on regional differences. European-based subject matter experts, 78% of them, believed that it was the organization's responsibility to provide these ergonomic settings for their workers. 58% in North America, 52% in Asia, and if we went to Oceania, Australia and New Zealand, they were pretty much saying 100% of them it is the remote workers' responsibility to ensure their working environment. So we're really divided upon this issue when we look upon the regulatory aspects and the role of the organizations. But we see some things afoot. So one of the things that caused a great deal of headlines, and one of the conversations that we had in the last experts assessment was this case from the Swiss Federal Supreme Court, which said that organizations were responsible for companies' for employees' rent if they have a room devoted towards remote work and equipment. This isn't a case where also the employee was doing some storage for the company, but they were saying that the organization had to pay. And so this is a question that raises what's going to change in each local market. If we're talking about Scandinavia, if the company is expecting that the worker is going to work more than 1 day a week from home, the organization has to provide ergonomic work settings, so table, chair, things like that. So these are things that are changing afoot, or changes afoot. So the question is, what are the ones coming to your local market? Next slide, please. And this kind of plays deeply into the well-being challenges, because not only is it a question of the ergonomic challenges, which the ones we were talking about before relate to, they also relate to other well-being challenges which have really come to the fore over the winter time, particularly in the northern hemispheres, where the issues around stress and mental health issues, social and professional isolation, also related to insecurity. And there's some of these things that are really difficult to suss out. Is this purely a cause from people working remotely? Is it because they're working remotely under lockdown and unable to meet people from outside their households? Or is it the case in Northern Europe and North America, where you have between a third and half the population living in single family households with one individual, and they don't have that connection? But the pressure is on, combined with the isolation, which is really driving the well-being challenges moving forward. And that's something that we have to be particularly cognizant of as we move forward. Next slide, please. So again, this aspect around loneliness and the social connection, there's an aspect related to the lockdown, but we have to be cognizant of studies going back to 2010. And this is particularly related to studies done by Nicholas Bloom from Stanford that show from a number of remote working projects that he's done where workers were working 100% of the time from home. About half of them after a year's time wanted to come back to work at least part of the time because they missed that social and professional connection. And these were workers that had the infrastructure. They had their children not being at home. They had privacy. They had the infrastructure to do so, but they still wanted to come back, and loneliness has been a big issue. And this is something I'm really interested in hearing Nigel's perspective on, because he's doing a fantastic study in the UK with the Loneliness Lab exactly on this issue. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of the things that come back, is that, again, that loneliness, that social connection, that professional connection is some of the things that will bring people back again and again, come back to the office. And so the subject matter experts were quite focused upon this need for social interactions. We have to remember that when we're talking about the segment of the workforce, particularly knowledge workers, they need to oftentimes address complex tasks, and those complex tasks can be done, oftentimes are done quite well in an office environment where they could discuss and parlay with their clients and colleagues, but the questions around straightforward tasks and things like that require focus. Those things could do at home. We have to also be cognizant that a lot of people cannot work from home because they have the lack of facilities and they just lack the infrastructure for do so, and they don't have the privacy issues. One of the funny things that we often don't think about, which also drives a lot of HR practitioners kind of hairy in the workplace, is that oftentimes 1/3 of us actually meet our spouses at work. So we have to think about that social connection that we're missing from not being there in the office environment as well. Next slide, please. So this leads to a quite interesting discussion around diversity and inclusion as well, because we have to talk about how does this workplace bring people together, and what is the role of remote work in this? And here that infrastructure question comes in quite profoundly. Now, 50% of the SME panel expected that the increased use of remote work will improve organizations' diversity and inclusion efforts. But when we see what's going on, and I think there's a great opportunity to do so because more people can, particularly who have mobility issues and things like that, can actually participate in the workforce on their terms, or if they have aspects around neurodiversity and different types of work settings that they need to control to be able to actively participate, remote work could be a great benefit. But if we see on the next slide, one of the things that's occurring, at least under the pandemic, is that remote work is leading to greater economic polarization because there's many people who can work, who cannot work remote. There's many people who can work remotely, and there's many people who cannot. And that's, of course, due to the type of work, the lack of infrastructure, having a digital high-speed connection. 6% of the US does not have access to broadband at stable speeds. 13% in Australia and about 20% in the United States. There's actually a C-session, which is decline in wages and employment due to gender differences in sectors and employment, and also inequality in caregiving and social responsibilities. So there's a lot of tension that's being brought up by the pandemic and this rapid shift to remote work. And the question is, what does the long-term implications of a shift to remote work play out as we switch over to the long-term from this immediate buffer scale? Next slide, please. Now, what we're seeing also is this kind of great great shift in the ways that we're actually monitoring how people are working, and the proliferation of different platforms to actually support people in how they work, and the shift towards hybrid working solutions. So one aspect is to create apps to control and have the ability to book. So remote workers could say, I'm working from home and now I have to go into the office and book meeting facilities and things like that in the workplaces they need. And we're getting these apps that are proliferating all over the place in real estate, in flexible space, in management, the Internet of Things and smart building, which is playing into construction tech and data analytics and visualization. But one of the aspects that we're not talking so much about is the explosion in remote monitoring technologies. And that's one of the things that we're seeing come out to the fore in the workplace. And what we saw is an extremely divided SME panel around employee monitoring. When we talked about remote health censoring, that really divided the panel with no clear trajectory around which direction it was going. But there's many companies who are doing it to monitor the temperatures of the workers coming into the workplace. But we're also seeing an explosion of keystroke monitoring, screen monitoring, a number of different devices to actually, or technologies to actually monitor when and how other people, how people are working, remote workers are working. And so if we look at the number of companies, and this is a Gartner study that were actually applying passive tracking of remote workers in April 2020, it was 16% of companies surveyed. And in June 2020, it really exploded, 10% increase in, or 10% more companies were reporting, a quarter of companies were now passively tracking their remote workers and making sure they were productive. And that leads to a challenge around this need to manage by not just the question around managing by results, not time, and the whole issue around trust to really make the team around remote working work. Now, there's a wealth of information that could continue on, and I could see that we're running out of time. So I invite you to download the summary and the executive summary from the expert assessment Delphi. You could do that at experts.ifma.org. And I hope that you'll be joining us for a further webinar series.
Thank you, Jeff. Great overview and lots to talk about. I know you could keep on for a couple of hours more with all this input, but I'm really happy to turn it over to the panel now. We're already receiving a lot of questions from the audience, so appreciate that and keep those questions coming because we'll pick them up as we go. But I'd like to start with you, Kate. In any input from the survey and also from Jeff's input that surprised you, or anything that you missed that you don't think that the SME sort of focused on? You're muted, Kate.
told myself about 20 times that I was going to do that. I guess really three things come to mind. One, that we were much more resilient than I expected them to be, or expected us to be, employers and employees. By just a couple of months into it, people were already saying that they felt very productive, 70 to 80%. And that number has held true throughout the months. That they figured it out. They made it happen. Second was that young people seem to be having the most trouble with remote work. You would have expected the opposite because they're more tech savvy and all of that. But as it turns out, they don't have the home environment. They don't have a dedicated space. They miss the cultural elements of going to work, the informal coaching, being around their peers. So that was kind of a surprise. And then I think the third thing is how dramatically we're adopting. Companies are announcing that they're going to adopt this in a big way going forward. And quite frankly, it's something that worries me a little bit.
Thanks. And Nov, same question to you. You have a little bit of a different background because you're HR. So I'm also really curious to get your input in terms of, is there anything in the survey that surprised you, or anything that you felt that we didn't focus enough on?
Right. So I will certainly agree with Kate in the perspective of the resiliency. In fact, I think we've proven ourselves very resilient in the sense that we've accelerated digitization much faster than we ever thought we could. And I think we're all certainly from a technical standpoint, I'm extremely happy about that. But I think we're finding, and I saw that in the hybrid movement, I don't think that we're in sync with the infrastructure around us. In other words, I'm looking at the reality that schools are trying to drag students back, but are unsuccessful and very choppy about how they're doing it. So I'm looking at how are we impacting our environment in a cohesive or holistic manner. We're just not doing it that well at all. So I think there's kind of a begging question out there. How much needs to be in sync to be able to move to this hybrid work environment? In all honesty, to Kate's point, many of us were not equipped with a home office. And as a result of that, we want to go back to work, but that's a long commute and we're losing time in it. So we really are looking for that infrastructure to kind of catch up with the needs. And I think employers, I will say it from an HR standpoint, I think employers are also missing the opportunity to train how to conduct a remote and distributed workforce. We've never really been forced to do that. And we've stumbled through this last year doing so. I think I saw this slide about the isolation and so on. We're just not doing well in terms of our communication and our patterns. So I think HR has a responsibility, if you will, to train people how to work in a distributed environment as a worker and as a manager. So those are my observations there.
Thanks, but and that begs a series of other questions. But Trine, I mean, you're working from Nordea and the bank, and I know you have worked a lot with remote work and getting people off sort of out of the bank's environment and working from home. How have you dealt with some of the things that Nov was talking about here?
You can say no one knows. No one knows what will happen. Can you hear me? Yeah, hear me now. Can you take it again, Peter?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. Yeah. Go ahead, Trine.
She's frozen.
Peter, take the question again. My name.
All right. Let me. I think you have some connectivity issues. Let me turn to Nigel, and we got a great question here, Nigel, from Pat LaSala, who says, what are some of the suggestions from the SMEs on how to deal with employees who are facing loneliness, depression, etc.? One of the topics that Jeff touched upon.
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and obviously an important issue. I mean, I think as an industry, we're just becoming more aware of mental health issues and well-being and loneliness and connectedness and so on. And the pandemic has really brought that to home, hasn't it? Where we're seeing it even more of it. So yeah, there's things we can do. I mean, the main thing is that when we're coming in and out of the office, we're seeing people, we're bumping into them, we're having a quick chat with them, we're having a coffee and so on. And that's just ongoing, and it's just something we do. But when we're not in the office all together at the same time, then how do we replicate that? And it's a kind of a little bit artificial, but we do have to do things such as have regular team meetings, which is good practice anyway, but certainly have one at the start of the week or the end of the week so that everyone is involved. Manage those meetings well. Who's being quiet, pick them out, say their name, ask them to be involved, maybe ask people to make a mini presentation just so people feel connected and involved in the meetings. Also, we can have one-to-one, so organize that coffee just like we would at work. Say, do you fancy coming for a coffee? We can do that virtually, and as a manager we can also have one-to-one meetings in addition to those team meetings. And I think it's just forcing ourselves to do that and get into that routine. Otherwise it just doesn't happen. And I say, once we, at the start, it may feel a little bit artificial to organize these little meetings and coffees and catch-ups. And one of the best ones is have a team meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, followed by informal drinks. So come end of work, say, okay, we've done the formal business. Now let's all go and grab a coffee or a beer or a glass of wine, whatever, and have a chat. And that can all be managed. But it will feel a bit strange to do it at the start, but eventually it become a little bit more normal, a bit part of the day-to-day running of the office and habit.
Great input. And Nov, back to you. I mean, on HR and getting the HR perspective on what Nigel is talking about here, are we prepared as organization and as leaders to tackle that, not only from an infrastructure point of view, but also from a leadership and management point of view?
Well, the answer I would say, unfortunately, is no. But I want to extend a little bit on something that Nigel mentioned, and that is, as we are interacting today in this conference, this is how you're going to see me all the time, whether I'm at the office or working distributed. And the reasoning behind that is we will be working in hybrid groups. Some of those people will be in the office, some will not. So we have to understand that this is pretty much our common ground for meeting. And we have to be able to work with it, communicate well, understand the dynamics, and if you will, try to address some of that isolation and loneliness aspect. Managers need to understand that going around the room, so to speak, is going to be pretty key to ensure that people are feeling that they're both being asked the questions, have an opportunity. And I saw the comments here about a safe environment. We need to really create that trust where I can be honest and open about what I need or what I have as a concern and express that. And so I think whether we're working in an office or not, I think that we're going to be in this environment a lot, an awful lot. And I don't think we're well trained. So to answer your question, Peter, no, I don't think we're ready for it.
And that makes another question.
Course on how to run a video meeting, but that's just my perspective.
No, and it's a very good point, because there's a great question here from Dawn Tonya that she's also hearing about Zoom fatigue, and I think that's probably an issue we can all relate to. Kate, I know that's something that you've been working with as well. How do you deal with some of these issues around Zoom fatigue when you're a teleworker and when you are dealing with these types of issues that Nigel and Nov is talking about here?
It goes back to Nov's point about training. We, before the pandemic, if we were going to work with a company to develop a remote work strategy, we might roll that out over 6 months, a year and a half. And during that time, we would have been doing the training. We would have been creating the team norms. Every meeting doesn't have to be a Zoom meeting. We would have gotten used to asynchronous communications. So, everything doesn't have to be one-to-one. I talked to somebody the other day that had 17 Zoom meetings in a row. I just can't imagine that. But it's all about this. We sort of have let it happen rather than made it happen. And when I said earlier that I was kind of worried that companies were jumping on so fast, is that I'm afraid that they're not going to go back and do those things that we would have done if we were rolling this out in an organized fashion. And that's creating those norms and the etiquette and the team relationships and working hours and all of those things. We need to go back and refine those to address the way we'll be working probably forever.
Yeah, Nigel, you have a comment?
Yeah, I totally agree, Kate. And I think there's some simple tips as well, because I think one of the issues with Zoom, there's like a bit of a productivity paradox, because the great thing about online virtual meetings is there's no travel between the meetings. So, hey, we can be really productive, bang, 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 those 17 meetings in a day. But the downside is we're not decompressing between meetings. We would have walked, I would have walked maybe to a meeting 15 minutes away or to another client, or we would have a little break between the meetings, and we're not getting that. We're not getting the decompression time. And I think that's why it really feels tiring. So a little tip is to, rather than book 1 hour meetings, book meetings in 45-minute slots, leaving the 15 minutes at the end of the hour free. If it's a 2-hour meeting, have 2 45-minute slots with a break in between, and just get into that habit. And whilst that might seem, well, that's not very productive, Nigel, we're wasting 15 minutes. No, that's the time when we re-energize and we get better and we get ready for the next meeting, and it helps us get through all those meetings rather than just having them back to back with no breaks at all.
Great point.
Great suggestion. I can vouch for that. Sometimes you have to come up with bad excuses to get 5 minutes away from a meeting and decompress and get a cup of coffee or something like that. So that, I think that's a very good suggestion. Trine, you're back with us. Hopefully you have connectivity is a little bit better. I know Nordea has worked a lot with this issue. Anything that you can share on that whole area around hybrid working models and how you can connect the teams via these team meetings that we are talking about here?
Yeah, I think that Kate has a point here. We need to pause and start all over again. We need to listen to people. It has been a change, and the whole world has been out there. So what we have done is we have done a lot of surveys. We invited people in, we're involving people, asking them, because no one knows. What do you want? No one knows. Everyone's looking at us saying, you must know what will happen going forward. And I'm always saying, we don't, no one knows. So we need together to find the new way. It is a fact, because we haven't seen the long run, even though it's been like a year. We haven't seen. So what we are doing now is we are pausing, and we started up a project already in August together with people, saying people and real estate and workplace management need to gather forces together with technology, look into what is needed going forward. This is a people issue. It's about buildings, it's not about technology, it's about the people. So we need to make sure that we onboard the people in the right way here. And what we can see when we ask our people is, I'm missing the office, they want to bed. But at the same time, going forward, they want a more work-life integration. They want a more balanced way. And we need to take care of it depending on what kind of job you have, what kind of personal life you have, and also what we want to come in. So there's a lot of things we need to touch upon in here. But I think we have forgotten this going forward will be a proactive choice. We need to take every day. What do you want today? Do you want to work from home, or do you want to come to the office or to a hub or whatever? And it has never been like that. You just did normally this day. And this is change, and we need to help people in that one, I think.
Thanks, Trine. I think you still have some connection issues, but I think we got most of what you were saying. There was a little bumpy there, but let's see if we can manage that. Let's just jump to another area because I know it also raised a lot of comments and questions from the audience, especially on the note from you, I believe it was, Kate, originally, that Jeff also put up on one of his slides, that companies can save an average of $11,000 annually for each remote worker who telecommutes 2.5 days or more. How did that savings comes into play? Because surely, I mean, the real estate is still there, so it seems like, you know, telecommute and working from home is a little bit of an add-on for some. And also, and that's also again from Pat Lasala, where does the saving comes from for the company, assuming the cost of real estate? And then, in addition to this, what type of investment should companies be making to improve the well-being of their workforce related to what we talk about here? So that was 2 questions, Kate. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I might have to ask you the second one again. On the first one, I could answer it. Just wrote the majority of the savings is not from real estate, although that 2 to 3 day a week range is kind of the sweet spot for both employees and employers. But for employers, it's the sweet spot because that's the point at which you can start to think about unassigned seating and drop-in spaces and not actually provisioning on that 1-to-1 person-to-desk ratio. But the majority of the savings actually comes from increased productivity. Studies from before the pandemic, 10 years back, studies since the pandemic is showing that all are showing that the people are more productive when they're working from home, and that's because of fewer interruptions and because of giving back the majority of the time that they would have spent commuting. That's kind of a double-edged sword too, because they're also overworking. But the rest of the savings, so it comes from the real estate, increased productivity, reduced absenteeism, something else that's been proven over and over again, reduced turnover, and an assumption that of continuity of operations, the company would have been able to continue working 1 day a year had they not been trained in remote work. So I never would have thought to put 365 days a year in the model. But those savings only work if you do it right. And that's what I think we need to talk about. And one of the things doing it right is provisioning your people. If they don't have the tools, the technology to get the job done, if they don't have the comfortable work environment, I calculated that you could save 300, you could buy 300 ergonomic chairs for the cost of 1 workers' comp claim. I'm a former banker, I calculate everything. It's false economy to scrimp on some of these things. And I know companies haven't quite decided who's going to stay at home and who's not, but I really think we're at the point where they have to make those decisions about if we want people to do their best, then we have to give them the best environment in which to do it.
And then the second half of the question was really what kind of investments should company be making in terms of securing that well-being and safety of their remote workers or their teleworkers?
Yeah, where we're seeing it settle out, I'll answer that more in terms of what companies are doing. Where we're seeing it settle out is giving them some kind of either stipend for, say, $500 to $1,500 to go buy that furniture, or setting up a discount furniture buying program, or using a stipend management program where people get to pick what they want. And then there's also the question of home expenses. Some states in the U.S. actually require that companies pay for home office expenses, including things like part of the heating bill and part of the internet connection. In Europe, there are places where it's required. In Canada, and this is changing constantly. But I think the answer to it should go back to what do your people need to be successful? And if they are having trouble paying the heating bill because it's gone up, and some people live that close in terms of savings, then you've got to make that investment. You're saving money. You've got to invest some of that back in your people.
Now, you have a comment?
Yeah, just a very quick one to extend a little bit on what Kate was saying. And when you asked about investment, I'm seeing one of the, shall we say, newer but not brand new technology investments being telehealth. In all honesty, because of the lockdown and such, we found that people were not visiting their doctors as well. And so therefore, at the cost of their own health, claims were going down, but not because we're getting better, we're just not going to the doctor. So telehealth has now become an extremely important part of the well-being offering, if you will. And I'm starting to see that even mental health clinicians who can book an appointment and do a video visit type of thing, a little bit of dialogue, yoga, you name it, all those kind of things are coming to the forefront as part of the company's investments. Well-being really kind of sat in the backseat for many years as just being, well, it's a nice thing to have. I think it'll become a game changer as time goes on. And I saw the Zoom fatigue and so on. Some of the suggestions here have been extremely good. In fact, to tell you the truth, I love the audience's suggestion. I'm learning from them, which is wonderful. But yeah, I think we are seeing that the technology investments are going to be the key to our ability, the standardization of how we interact with one another, how we digitize our perspective. I keep seeing that Zoom will allow me to record my meeting. I don't have the time to go back and watch another meeting that it took place that I missed. And so I think we'll see some investments in the technology patterns that will accelerate our ability to condense what we just saw and heard in such a fashion that I can go get it when I need it. And that, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of investment in the technology platforms. So that's
thanks, Noel. Thanks. And Nigel, I know this is an area that you've also worked extensively with.
Yeah.
I know you have some input as well.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the original point about the savings and the figures that Kate came up with and so on. And I was so pleased that Kate didn't say it was solely based on reducing property, because I have to say, particularly in the UK and certainly around the rest of the world, what we've been doing over the last 20 years is just taking space away from our office workers. It's reduced by about 40% in the UK. And we're densifying the space. We're taking the space away, and it's all in the chase to save property costs. But I think what that means that's happened is we've created these uncomfortable, highly dense open plan environments, and what's happened is that's not good for noise. It's not good for concentration. It's not good for cross infection, and so I think what the pandemic has done is given us an opportunity to actually sit back and just think, okay, let's readdress the space. Let's think about maybe we can lower the densities and make the spaces more comfortable so that when people do come in, if they've got unassigned seating, we can start to create more comfortable and productive environments. So that was my first point. I think, but having said that, I know that the workplace strategists, the facilities managers are under pressure to reduce space. That's going on right now in the UK, and I'm sure everywhere else. So that was one point. And then my second point was the productivity performance at home. So yeah, a lot of the studies show, and the surveys and the IFMA one, so on, that people perceive that they're more productive. They are more productive. They're working without concentration, reduced absenteeism. That's all brilliant. But I think, and maybe it's more qualitative than quantitative, but what I've been discovering is that people are missing out on that brainstorming, connection, and innovation. So whilst we might be productive with pure outputs, deliverables, where we might be missing out is that kind of coming together to create the next thing. So the long-term performance and productivity, if you like, which comes through innovation and strategizing. And that's why I think that if we are going to reduce desk space in offices, we ought to start thinking about increasing spaces that support innovation and collaboration and creativity, as well as spaces for concentration for those young millennials that we heard about earlier who haven't got a space at home to work in anyway.
Thanks, Nigel. And I got a question here from Mike Cannon, and also earlier from Jennifer Rodriguez, which was a little bit along the same lines. Companies provide economic, safe working environments in corporate offices, but many send employees home only with a laptop. What changes can we expect from working from home, economic support? And especially, Jeff Saunders, what do we see in terms of legislation around this area? Because I know in Europe, and I know you have been involved in some of these discussions on a more governmental level, that's probably going to be some kind of a legislation and responsibility for the corporate environment, the corporate employers, in order to safeguard and secure their people when they're working from home.
Thanks, Peter. I think that, and thanks for the question. I think what we have to remember that March 2020 was an emergency triage situation. So, people weren't expecting to have their workers work from home, and they just kicked them home with a laptop to continue working. And because of the panic over the economic implications of the pandemic and people having this huge disruption to their working lives and organizational working lives, we focus on the productivity and had a very short and narrow focus on the productivity. And thinking back to Trina's comments before, about putting the people more in center, I think, is a key aspect, because one of the reasons why younger workers have struggled with remote work is that, the first few years of being in the workplace is not because they're tech savvy, it's because the workplace is so central to their identity development. So that holistic focus on people is quite important. Getting back to the ergonomic questions, this fundamental shift to a new style of working is going to lead to a fundamental shift, not only coming from government regulations, but depending on the strengths of the labor unions in specific markets, a whole new discussion, particularly in countries in Northern Europe and Central Europe where they have strong labor unions, about, hey, we hear you're saving all this money because of X, Y, and Z. How are you investing that in us? What are you going to be doing from us? And those being leveraged on as well. So this is one where it's going to be a dynamic process, as Kate was talking about earlier, around a dynamic changing in a number of countries' regulations. But the next time you have your, collective bargaining arrangements, these things are going to be front and center, and they're going to be driving a lot of discussions for HR and legal departments, let alone for FM. So this is going to be a lot of fun for the next couple of years for people working in those spaces. And then I think for all of us working in the workplace strategy session, the conversation we've had, I've loved it, but we've been very functionally oriented. We haven't been very people oriented about what is improving the people's lives, and taking that holistic approach about ensuring that they're productive, innovative, and collaborative. And I think we have to have a thought around this about getting away from that discussion and more about putting people back in focus.
Thanks, Jeff, and Trine. I hope you will chime in. I hope your connection has improved a little bit. But I know Nordea is working a lot with this area. I mean, anything you can add to what Jeff is saying?
Yeah, I think exactly, because everyone is talking about the savings. It's not about the savings. It's about creating where people want the best. So instead of trying to reduce square meters and so forth, it's very much around how can we support people in the best way working from home or working office. It's about the people. We need to look at the people and how to, not to change those, but to support those in the best way. And that way, I think we will get up the What we have seen, and I think several of you have touched upon that, is that newcomers, new people coming into organization, you cannot find an organization when you do it from home. It's very difficult. So we can see, for instance, if we look into our call center, a long time when they're working from home, but all our newcomers that has just joined the company, they are lacking performance because they're not coming into the office. But all our people, it's not about things.
Thanks, Trine. Thanks. We are getting to a close. This is a really interesting and great conversation, and I think we could keep on. I just want to nod to you, maybe for the last comment in the panel, because I'm fascinated by having an HR professional here, and we have said for such a long time that, as facility managers and corporate real estate professionals, we need to create our new best friends have to sit in the HR team. So yes. How is all this discussion and debate that we are having around this, how is that addressed from an HR and of course also from a technology issue, which is your background? Anything that you could sort of sum up around this discussion?
Well, I really want to say to Jeffrey's point, we do need to put the people first and foremost. There's no doubt. It's always been the workforce. All of a sudden, everybody's motto is our people are our most important investment. Well, that was because we can't find them anymore. They seem to be home. We can't home. So it is our most important, but we do need to put the people first. And quite literally, I think we're going to see both legislation and human resources coming together. I like your point, Jeffrey, about, as you go to a union bargaining table, the subject will be safety at the workplace, the jobs that can be done remotely, all those things. HR will be front and center and not only have a place at the table, but may very well be leading the conversations at the table for quite a while. And I think that, in all honesty, I'd love to challenge the audience. You heard my comment. I would love to see us start talking not about the new normal, but the next normal. This is an evolving and dynamic environment, and it is going to be the next normal. We, as a group, are in the influencing perspective to change how we do things. Kate has been a leader in that situation. Nigel has done the same. You know, there's a lot of things that we still can be doing, and technology will follow the leads of our thinking. And we should be challenging. We should be challenging HR, and we should be challenging our governments, if you will. We didn't talk very much about the fact that we are skirting the issues of privacy. But I think that, in all honesty, we lost our privacy a long time ago. We just need to say that it's being responsibly used for the purposes of bettering our lives, not invading our lives. That might be another subject for another webinar.
I'm sure it will.
Anyway, yeah, I think that
Thanks.
HR is certainly understanding and has been under the gun now for the last year, trying to understand what we need to do for the population. I saw a lot of the comments here, and I think that maybe even grabbing some of those comments and republishing that as just tips and tricks is a pretty good idea. The audience is pretty savvy, and I think they responded very well. But this is going to be an evolving situation. It is not next year it'll be done. We'll be doing this a long time. So that's my 2.5 cents about it.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for your time and being on the panel, for chiming in. A very interesting discussion, and I think we can spend a lot more time on this. Thanks to you, Kate, Trine, Nov, Nigel, and Jeff. Thanks for all the questions. And you have an opportunity to join us again on the 31st of March for the next IFMA Expert Assessments webinar, which is going to be on sustainability. But already next week on the 16th, the Workplace Evolutionaries will host a webinar where they'll go into the Asia Pac experience and what we can learn from that region. That seems to be a little bit more ahead of the curve compared to the rest of the world. And then, as Chris was also alluding to in the beginning, you can find a ton of material at the IFMA Coronavirus Resource Center website. And you can see that through at www.ifma.org. So watch this space as we communicate more and we continue this dialogue. With this, thank you so much for all the participants, for all the input and the great questions. And back over to you, Chris, for a close-up.
Hey, thank you so much, Peter. And yes, this was a fascinating discussion, really incredible insights. And thank you to all of the panelists for participating. It was really informative. And thank you. The real MVP is actually the audience today. Thank you so much for the engagement. This has been one of the most lively sessions we've done. And Michael, you asked if there's going to be a transcript. We will package up all of these insights, and this will guide future discussions as we kind of continue the conversation and bring you content to help you through the pandemic. As Peter mentioned, go to ifma.org/coronavirus if you want this and past episodes and other really helpful content. And also, if we can put up the URL, we've got the World Workplace Europe coming up. So March 17th through the 18th, please be sure to check that out. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful session. We'll see you on the next one.